introducing Miss Deepa Kiran. She will be moderating, and also the young panelist Miss N. Samhita. OGD by Anusha Ravishankar. Anusha Ravishankar will be joining online. Hello, ma'am. Namaste. Anusha Ravishankar, ma'am.
Namaste. Hello.
You have your moderator, Miss Deepa Kiran, and also young panelist Samhita. So she's coming. So I request now to start with moderator Miss Deepa Kiran. You can take charge and say hello to the author and also your young panelist and introduce them to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Welcome, everyone. And Anushka, warm welcome to you.
Thank
Really
you.
glad to have you join us here. And joining us is also Samhita, who's the young panelist on board here, which I thought is a very interesting concept that we have this time. It's usually the adults doing the discussion. Yeah. So Anushka Ravishankar, the moment we hear her name, we think of nonsense verse. And we know that you're very inspired by Lewis Carroll's style of work. And there's a very Indian English usage nonsense verse that we typically think of Anushka Ravishankar. We're really glad for that. And you have fans across the country, across the world for the wonderful work. And we're here today to know more about your new book, OGD.
It's Ogd.
Ogd. And interestingly, when I Googled Ogd, automatically it was giving me search results for God.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess starting right there, it's very interesting, the choice of title that you have for this, the notion of a Messiah in your story, and the randomness. I'd like to start with some of the words and phrases that the reviews had. It said random, profoundly funny, as clear as mud. These are all reviews that were given with a lot of love. Okay. And someone wrote the rating was 4 and it said, but I could not understand it. So, and when I read it, I think it's so fair to hear all of these that I couldn't understand. It also said, this is not a book for those who like straight narratives. Yeah, I'm starting from the reviews because I think that was a very interesting reference point, to reflect. The reviews were really reflecting that this piece of work, Ogd, has randomness, is profound, and at the same time, the narrative just goes detours in different spaces, different time zones, and back. So I can't even begin by saying that I have understood it. Yeah, but I'm very curious about it. And I do have a lot of questions, so does Samhita here. To start with, okay, I want to quote something from the book. Yeah, I'm quoting from somewhere midway through the book, around page 44. I found it very interesting. It talks about, I don't intend to do the spoiler bit, but just a little bit where the king was gazing spellbound at Messiah, who was sucking nonchalantly at her toes, getting prepared for the travails of imprisonment and torture, which she, as Messiah, would be expected to endure with utmost fortitude. And then we go on to find out, but the king replied, chop off her head? No, that's okay. It's only the hair. He then invited the Messiah to become his consort if she promised to change her hairdo. Before I share my thoughts on that, I'd like you to tell me.
But don't. The one thing you should not ask nonsense writers is what they mean, because the whole point is not to mean anything. I'm glad you started with those reviews because I love them. I love them all. You're not supposed to understand the book. You're supposed to just enjoy it. Leave your your sensical side aside and just it's playing. That's what nonsense is all about. It's playing with ideas, and it's playing with logic, and it's playing with language. So basically, this is what I've done with the book. So I loved Clear as Mud because that's, you know, that's a really good example of a nonsensical review, actually, because Clear as Mud sounds sensible, but if you think about it, what? Clear as mud, it makes no sense. So that's the whole point of nonsense, that it is not meant to make sense. Um, I'm quite curious at your at the choice of excerpt that you've taken to, that you've pulled out, and I would like to know what you think of it and why you chose this.
Oh, two reasons. One, because the very end of the book, again, sorry for the spoiler, I'm not mentioning it. It
Yes,
goes back to
yes,
referencing
correct.
this very
That's
episode,
right.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Of the king, of the hairdo, and there's even
Correct.
a doodle of that right to the very end. So it sort of closed the loop in a certain sense. And it made a lot of sense to me in this, for the fact that putting the toenails in the mouth is what Messiah's issue was, is what everybody had a problem with. But just by talking about the hairdo in a certain sense, this is, since you asked how I saw it, it was as if the king was taking away the issue itself, which is a great way, criticism gives power to an issue, and ignoring an issue is like, okay, you don't even exist. Is
Right. I think that there is too sensible a reading of the whole thing. The point is, it's the word that keeps coming up in connection to the book. It is random. So the whole thing about the king and the hair and all that, it's pretty random. It's just fun. It's just playing with the ideas of even monarchy and how a king expects that everybody will do what he wants. It's playing with the idea of what a messiah should be, which is that, as she says, she's expected to be stoic and all of that. It's playing with all these ideas that are out there. It's so if you've read the whole book, there's a lot of mathematics in it. So it's also playing with ideas in mathematics. It's playing with the idea of the strange loop, which is what the messiah is, because she's eating her toenails so that her toenails can grow long and strong so that she can eat them. So that's a strange loop, which is a mathematical concept as well. So there's all these things, all my various the things that interested me at the time that I was writing, which was mathematics and language always, all that just came together, and I'm just, it's a play on everything in the world, actually. And that's what nonsense really is. It's playing, and it's why you'll find that mostly it's children who like nonsense, because they understand play in a way that adults don't. For adults, everything has to have meaning and sense, and it has to be profound and all of that. And nonsense makes fun of, not makes fun of it really, but kind of sidesteps the whole business of meaning. And language, as we know, has been invented to make meaning. It's invented so that you mean things. So when you deliberately set out to subvert that, then it creates kind of a sense of randomness. It's not that random. Nonsense can't be that random either. It has to kind of almost make sense. So, if you pick up a little thing and ask me, why did you write that? There really is no reason except that I was playing with it and I was having fun with it.
and talking of
Having said
mathematics.
that, I must say that it's not, I mean, for what it's worth, there is some kind of a narrative. As you see, there is some kind of a structure. It's easier to write nonsense verse than to write nonsense prose, actually. There are very few people who write nonsense prose. Lewis Carroll has, but it can't always be fully nonsensical. Sukumar Ray has written nonsense in Bengali, but writing nonsense prose is a rarer thing than nonsense verse.
Yeah. And how different do you find writing nonsense prose and nonsense poetry?
See, I'll tell you the thing about nonsense is that it's not easy to free your mind from the shackles of sense, as it were. Your mind is your as a logical thinking person. You're conditioned to make sense all the time, to try and one a lead if a leads to b leads to c, cause and effect. All of that is part of the way one thinks, if one is a fairly logical person, which I am, contrary to what this book shows. I'm a very logical person. So um, so the attempt to break out of that is a quite an it's quite requires quite an effort. But when you're writing verse, what happens is, because you need to rhyme, I mean, a lot of people, if you read verse, a lot of people write nonsense unintentionally because they're trying to rhyme, But when you're writing nonsense, the fact that you have to rhyme helps your mind free itself from the shackles of meaning, as I said earlier. It helps you kind of think out of that, because you have to rhyme and you have to create things, but at the same time you can't be completely random, because that's then not nonsense. So but it gives you a nice framework to work within when you're writing verse. When you're writing prose, that framework is not there. It's like free fall. So it's very easy then to completely lose track of all sense or nonsense. And I'm saying nonsense in the literary sense of the term, right? So like gibberish, for instance, is not nonsense. So if you write gibberish, that's easy enough to do because you don't have to even try to make sense. But nonsense is not that random. It has to kind of straddle that line between meaning and non-meaning. So prose, therefore, is a little harder because it doesn't give you a framework to work within.
Hear you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. And I'd now pass the mic to our young panelist, Samhita. She's just graduated completing law, and she's now enrolled in the bar. She thoroughly enjoyed your book and has some
Hi,
questions for you.
Samhita.
Hello, ma'am. Nice to meet you. So,
Nice to meet you too.
I had a small question. So, there's a good amount of mention of historical events and social phenomenon in your book, just in a funny way. So, I was told it was a young adult book. So, did you set out to make it a parody or like a critique of modern day things?
Mm, See, parody is a kind of device that's used a lot in nonsense, and there is some parody in this. Like if you there is a bit of parody here and there, but on the whole, I didn't set out to make any kind of social satire or comment on the social situations that exist or existed at the time that I was writing it. I wrote it a while ago, actually. Have come into it in the same way that mathematics has come into it, because these are things that occupy me, right? So to that extent, yes, everything that's happening around me that was happening around me, and that I was at that moment interested in, and which also kind of fit the what I was writing, has come into it, but it's not meant to be a social statement of any kind, because it is not. It is nonsense, right? So the thing with nonsense is there's also a history of nonsense being read meaningfully. Like if you see, one of my favorite books in the world is Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll, which is about a group of people who go to hunt this creature called the snark, and nobody knows what a snark is. Actually, I don't think even at the end of it you know what a snark is. But they go to hunt the snark, and it's completely nonsensical again. Okay, completely. But after Lewis Carroll wrote the book, there were reams written about what it meant, what the snark represented this, the snark represented that, But when he wrote it, Lewis Carroll didn't mean any of those things. Now, I think that's perfectly okay. When you write something and put it out there in the world, no matter what you meant by it, people are completely it's fine to read what you want into it, because you bring your own, your own history and your own social circumstances and your own reading, what you've read and what you've experienced, all that you bring to when you're reading a book. And what you get out of it is what you get out of it. And, it may not have been what I put in, but that's fine. So if you saw it as social commentary, that's a perfectly legitimate reading. So I would be interested to know which part exactly you were talking about, though.
And the band-aids was very funny to read that chapter.
Ah,
So that made me think of how maybe many people these days, like children,
yeah,
because we're always trying to find meaning within the religions that exist. So
correct.
yeah, that aspect drew me to
Yeah.
that.
So the question of religion and how people fight over religion has always bothered me a lot, like for years and years. This was written many years ago, and what actually shocked me when I was reading the book again in order to get it published was how little has changed, and that that's really sad actually, because there's still fights over religion. It's getting worse, if anything. And yes, the whole business of fighting about religion and religious symbols and religious festivals and all of that has always really really bothered me. So that has come into the book as one of the things that that were in my head and which bothered me. And because it's this kind of book, and it is funny, and it is kind of made into a kind of funny situation. But you're right, it is something that came out of my own concerns for sure.
And I was also interested in the protagonist, the Paisa worm Messiah. What brought about the inspiration?
Well, the inspiration, see, inspirations come sometimes from actual things, sometimes from little quirks of even language. So the Paisava Messiah came from an idea of, the foot in the mouth. So a very unlikely heroine who has a foot in her mouth. That's where it came from. So uh, it's it also came, like I explained earlier. I was reading this at the time that I wrote the book. I was reading this fabulous book by Douglas Hofstadter called Gödel, Escher, and Bach. Douglas Hofstadter was a mathematician and writer, and science writer. So he wrote this book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach, in which he used the Gödel's theorem and also compared the drawings of Escher and the fugues of Bach, which are all examples of strange loops. So if you see in Escher paintings, he didn't do paintings, he did kind of etchings, I think. So if you see Escher prints, you'll have the one that best explains what I'm talking about, is that you have one structure where you see a person climbing up the stairs, right? And the person keeps climbing up the stairs, but then comes back to the point that he was at. So it's really a paradox, a kind of strange loop where you're going up, 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 and you expect to go up, but you come down. And Escher's managed to do that in his drawing. Similarly, I don't understand classical music very much, but similarly, Bach has done a similar thing in his fugue, where the music seems to go higher and higher, the note seems to go higher and higher, but before you realize it, without you realizing it, it's come down to the original note. So that again is a strange loop where you seem to be going in one direction, but you end up coming back to the point that you were at, which is reflected in a Mobius strip, which is also a mathematical function, where if you see in a Mobius strip, if you have a strip of paper and you twist it around and stick it, you draw a line on the upper side of the paper, you end up on the inside, right? So he has talked about mathematical he's talked about these three in relation to Gödel's theorem and mathematical functions. So I was reading that book and I was very fascinated with the idea of a Mobius strip and all this, the whole idea of the strange loop, which is a paradox. At the same time, it's something that actually exists and it has existed in art, in music, in mathematics, in geometry, because the Mobius strip is an actual structure. You can actually make a Mobius strip. So all these ideas were kind of churning in my mind, which is how the Messiah happened, because the Messiah is basically a human form of a Mobius strip, as it were, if such a human form can exist, where she eats her toenails so that her toenails can grow, so that she can eat them. It's like a snake swallowing its tail. It's all the same kind of strange loop. Does that answer your question,
It
Samita?
does
No.
perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, so the Mobius strip and the Messiah, that's the connection I placed just now. Okay. So you have graduated in mathematics.
That's right. Yeah, many years ago, though. Almost a generation ago.
And the subject still interests you, which is why,
Absolutely, yes, it
yeah,
does.
you're bringing it in.
Yeah.
But I assume the attempt is not conscious to bring in the mathematics element or to tell us about it, but more for a
No,
personal.
no, it's not meant to teach mathematics to anybody. It just comes from a fascination with certain mathematical ideas. Like in this case, Gödel's theorem is very much. If you notice, there's one poem called God Help You. If you've read the book, there's a very strange poem called God Help You, which is basically Gödel's theorem in verse form, which is a I mean, a simplified thing of Gödel's theorem, the statement of Gödel's theorem in verse form. I'm trying to look for it.
It's called God Help You.
It's called Gödel Pew because it's a pun on
Ach-
Gödel.
okay, on Gödel's theorem. Okay.
Gödel's theorem. I'm just trying to look for it. Here it is. Is it? Yeah. It's on page 89. Shall I read it? Just for fun. Yeah. So, Gödel Pew is, be there a system never so fine, so logical, simple, consistent, axiomatic pertaining to number theory, be there formulations existent, and lo and behold, there also exist sneaking, insidious suspicions that within the system, this framework of proofs, lurk unprovable propositions. Right? So that is actually Gödel's theorem in a nutshell, which is that in any, I don't know if I'll be saying it absolutely right in mathematical terms, but in any number systems, any system in number theory, starts with certain axioms, right? And using these axioms, you go on to prove set up the entire system, you prove theorems, you have corollaries, you have all the rest, the whole mathematical system is set on the basis of certain axioms. But Gödel's theorem says that it is impossible to prove some of these axioms within the system itself. So if you want to prove an axiom within, there will always be certain propositions or axioms which cannot be proved within the system. That's what Gödel's theorem essentially is. I'm sure I'm simplifying it.
Okay,
Mostly.
okay.
So when I wrote all the mathematical parts, it just came from a fascination with all these ideas, you know. So and that fascination with logic is also what leads me to kind of subvert the logic and write nonsense. So it's a strange world. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you're coming completely opposite spaces of absolute logic and then subverting the logic also.
Exactly. That's how nonsense actually works. It subverts logic. It subverts language. And when you say subvert, it's in a playful way.
Yeah.
It's not subverting it for any great to make any point. It's just to play with it. So it's because I love logic so much that I like to play with it. You know, it's because I love language so much that I like to play with it. So and that incidentally, Lewis Carroll was also a logician. So clearly also comes from the same kind of thought process where you have logic and then you just make it completely lose meaning, because a lot of Lewis Carroll's nonsense is very logical, completely meaningless. It's a very strange paradox there.
Yeah, and maybe with your mathematical background, you will be able to perceive that and enjoy it a lot more than some of us who
I
come from
don't know if that's
non-mathematical.
true. See, I'll tell you the thing here. It's like that person who wrote the review saying that I didn't understand it, but still seem to have liked it, right?
Yeah,
So that's the point. You need to be able to forget it. Forget that you don't know mathematics.
yeah,
Forget that you don't understand what's going on, and just revel in the playfulness of it. And I think young
right.
people are able to do that more easily. Children are able to do that more easily, to just set aside, everything. And there are a lot of nonsense words that even all our languages have for small little children, because they don't care if something means something or not. If it sounds fun, I mean, it sounds funny. Sounds are used a lot in nonsense because that's part of the playing with language thing, no? The angle, that whole playing with language angle comes with that. You play with the sounds of language as much as with the meanings of language. So a lot of nonsense words comes with sounds, and that's why children relate to it very easily, because they don't care if it means anything or not. If it sounds funny and it sounds fun, and it the more it kind of subverts the adult world, the happier they are with it. So I think when you come to read a book of nonsense like this, if you think, oh God, this is mathematics and I'm not going to understand it, then you're not going to enjoy it. You just leave all that meaning aside and just enjoy the words as they are. And I think that's fine. I don't think everybody who reads this doesn't really know or understand mathematics. I know my editor didn't, and a lot of people who read it have no clue of mathematics. But you can still, I think, keep aside your brain for a little while and enjoy it,
Right, right,
your
right,
logical
right.
brain.
Yeah. Just thinking that another level of enjoyment would be there. Definitely, it's fun
Yeah,
either which ways.
absolutely. That I completely agree. Like my
Yeah.
friends who studied mathematics and who are, have a completely different kind of enjoyment. In
Yeah,
you know
it's like getting the
they
private
get a
joke.
completely
Yeah.
correct. They get a
Yeah.
completely different kind of thing. That absolutely. But that's true of anything you read, no? Because if you're reading
Yeah.
about say the experiences or in a place that you've never been to, people who've been there and lived there have a different kind of enjoyment than
True.
you do as a person who's never been there. So it's the same
Yes.
kind.
Yeah, yeah. There's a certain semiosphere they come from.
Yeah,
Yeah, talking
correct.
about the sounds, yeah, it is very true, that children typically grow up saying bow bow or meow. It's the
Yeah,
sounds that come first and the words that
correct,
come later. So
correct.
it's a very intuitive connection with
Totally.
language that is beyond literal words that I
Correct.
guess excites them. And talking of the lack of logic, also as a storyteller, I know there are storytelling sessions where I will be like, and the teacher wrote this on the board, and she told the children, open your notebooks, and nobody will ask me where is the notebook, where is the pencil. They'll pretend open their pretend notebooks and take the pretend pencil, and the adults will be like, oh, where is the notebook, right? So yes,
Correct.
children
Yeah.
are so much more open to the
Yeah, yeah. They
world of.
cross that line between reality and fantasy very quickly.
Yes, yes.
Those lines are very blurred for them, which is
Yeah.
lovely. Which is, I
Yes.
wish we could do more of that actually as grown-ups.
Yeah, and you're helping us do that. And I know that you are inspired by Lewis Carroll, but tell me, I also read that Edward Lear, Edward Gorey are other writers whose works you really enjoyed. And
Yeah, but I have to say that I got into writing of nonsense because of Lewis Carroll. There's no question because I just absolutely adore his nonsense. Edward Lear is also Edward Lear is also very well. I mean, he Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll were around the same time. They started writing around the same time. Started writing nonsense. In fact, the word nonsense was coined as a response to their work, to Lear more than Carroll. I think I'm not. Because he set out to write nonsense, but Edward Lear is a very different kind of writer because he was an artist as well. So his nonsense is very visual. So it's about funny. So if you read it, you're also, apart from the fact that he also uh, illustrated them, even when you read the text by itself, it's very visual. So the nonsense is very visual. So the nonsense contains in having visuals which make no sense, kind of, almost. So it's a very different kind of nonsense, and it's lovely. But and I really love Lear's nonsense as well. But for me, Lewis Carroll is because I relate to him more easily. Uh, Edward Gorey also, I love his books. He's very, very irreverent, and I like that very much. Some of his books are like wouldn't be published today because we're all getting so politically correct nowadays. Some of them are really, really politically incorrect, and they would not make the cut now. But Victorians. I don't know if Gauri was Victorian actually, but it's pretty dark, some of it, and dark and funny, which is a very difficult combination. But I enjoy his work too. You're right.
talking of political, Samhita had a question related to that. Would you like to ask, Samhita?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. So, is nonsense verse a good way to foray into like political satire, maybe?
See, political satire is a different thing from nonsense. It's a fine line again. It's not very clear where political satire ends and nonsense because a lot of people confuse the two. But I think the main thing is the intent. The difference between the two is the intent. Nonsense is never intended as political satire. It may end up being that because of the content or whatever, because how you read into it. It may end up being that. It may also sometimes be kind of the subtext might be that, but pure nonsense honestly is not meant to be political satire. But political satire does quite frequently sound like it's meant to be nonsense. But political satire has a very clear intention, and it's clearly meant to criticize certain aspects of politics or society, and so that's where the difference is. Whereas a nonsense writer is just playing, political satirist is actually deadly serious. Though the vehicle he or she may use may be humor and satire and fun and making fun and all of that, but the intention is deadly serious. Whereas the nonsense writer, typical nonsense writer's intention is always playful.
Also about the title, is it a wordplay about Oz and God together? I mean, that's the
Yeah,
first
it's
thought that
not
came to me.
Oz. There's no Oz, but definitely God. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a wordplay on God. It was meant to use the letters of God, but a bit. Okay, this is a little backstory, but it doesn't come into the book. But when I was writing the first draft, this is what was in my head: that the nuclear. So there is. So there is God, right? The beginning of things. And the nuclear explosion exploded everything out of shape, including the word God, and became Ogd. So that's how the name came, if that makes any sense. It makes as little sense as the rest of the book, and it's not meant to make sense.
Talking of the title, who was behind this very, very interesting cover design? I almost thought it's the backside of the book and not the front.
So when we put the title, we decided that it needed a subtitle, and any subtitle we put made it sound too real and too meaningful, So we decided to put this. The editor and I, basically, we decided to have a really long subtitle, which is so long and has so many things in it that it basically means nothing. So if you use a few things, then it means those things, but if you use so many things, then it ends up meaning nothing. So we decided to have this very long subtitle, and given how much text was there in the thing, that kind of also then it kind of defined the cover. The designer at Puffin Penguin was the one who did the cover, so full credit to Shipra Bharti, who did the cover. So she's used the feet motif around, but I don't think these are the feet I've drawn. I don't think my feet are as nice as this. The feet, so I don't think she's used those feet, but she's used that idea of the feet which come up inside the book, as you know.
Yeah, yeah. And why the small case for the title?
Oh, that's a design decision completely, and I loved it. I also like the fact that she used Ogd in lowercase, because people do tend to read it as OGD. So the idea of having it in lowercase was to kind of, uh, you know, if it had it in uppercase, it would be OGD. So, but it doesn't seem to make people don't, because it's not a word, because it's not a word that anybody has ever heard. People do kind of think, what OGD? It's difficult for. I have to tell people that it's odd. But I like the lowercase thing. It's a design decision, actually, which I completely agreed with.
Yeah. In fact, when I first saw it, especially the subtitle, it looks like something that comes up when you type a word, searching for the meaning on Merriam-Webster or something.
Yeah,
It throws up
like
all
a
this.
thesaurus. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It
Yeah.
looked pretty much like that.
Yeah.
And if the intention was to boggle, it certainly boggled the mind.
Yeah, the intention is basically to make the reader know what they're in for, that they're not in for any sense, because it's about hairstyling and toenails, and also mathematics and philosophy, So,
And
you
physics.
don't, I don't want yeah, correct. I don't want the reader to go in expecting a certain kind of book. I mean, this is as random as it gets.
Yeah, yeah. So, could you just read the subtitle for us? Because the
Sure.
audience will also get an idea of what we're talking about.
So the title is Ogged, and the subtitle is A Mostly Random and Profoundly Nonsensical Inquiry into the Nature of Apocalypse, Cartography, Education, Hairstyling, Interdimensional Travel, Intertemporal Travel, Mathematics, Monarchy, Philosophy, Physics, Poetry, Publishing, Religion, and Toenails. Toenails are
I
very
don't.
important to the book.
Toenails are very important. That's why it's the last. So it stays in the mind, the imprint. Yeah. I wanted to come back to, you were talking about illustrations that Edward Lear used in his
Yes.
work, right? This book is also filled with all of this. We have pictures here. We have some scribbles, squiggles, doodles, whatever you'd like to call it. It's filled with all of these, and these have been made by.
Me. So these have all been done by me.
Yeah.
So as you can see, I am no artist. Okay, the whole idea was that again, it's playing with the idea of how Lear did his books with his illustrations. So it's playing with that idea as well because it's. I've done my illustrations, and I'm no artist like unlike Lear. So I've just done silly doodles, and in a way, the the drawing of the drawings that I did in the same spirit as I did the writing, which is like just fun and playing, and so they're not meant to be like perfect lines or anything. They're just fun doodles. So yeah, I did the illustrations myself. So as
Yeah,
you can probably make out.
the reason I was
But
asking. Yeah. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
tell me.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, I was saying that if the illustrations had been like perfect, like we did consider using an artist, but it would we felt that it would kind of go against the like if we had perfectly drawn feet, for instance, or a perfectly drawn hairdo, it wouldn't gel with the nonsensical feel of the book. So we felt that illustrations had to be as nonsensical as the writing. So, which is why we chose to keep mine. Yeah, what were you saying? You had a question about the
Yes,
illustrations.
I was asking who did the doodles because we have the Messiah being told that Messiah cannot doodle, and then there's something about justifying why she can doodle, and there we
But
have
it's
the
not the
author who
Messiah.
has who has doodles in the
Okay, I want to
connection.
make this clear. I was not born with my foot in my mouth.
You shoved it in later, or
Yes,
as your book says. No, I'm not commenting.
I did though. Yeah, so that so the Messiah doesn't doodle, but she did finally, right? She did a book of doodle because as she said, that this is again very logical. Now we say this actually about women as well. So you can't say that messiahs don't doodle if a messiah does doodle, right? Now, if she has doodled and she is a messiah, then messiahs do doodle.
Yes.
That's the point.
You wanted to ask something, Samhita, related to that?
No, I think the doodles really add like a very great depth of eccentric charm to the book. I think they go well together. Now that I know you're the illustrator, it makes perfect sense actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just-
Makes perfect nonsense, I hope.
It looked like a young person drew it. It looked like a young person would do it, and the children would relate to it very easily. I think because it's a
Yeah.
playful doodle. Yeah. Yeah.
We also have about the critic in this story. Yeah. Is there any autobiographical element? You spoke about how things are. Also, they've come from a personal space where there's the critic who at some point melts down, breaks down, and confesses
Yeah.
to the Messiah.
Not really, nothing at all. That when I wrote this book before I got into publishing like that. So I've been working in publishing, as you might know, but I wrote this book before that. So all the publishing stuff and the critic and all that is just purely from again just what I'd been reading and what I was interested in and all that. So the character of the critic just happened, came out of my head. No, there's no. I mean, since it came out of my head, maybe a little bit of autobiographical element to that extent, but not really. Not really. It's completely a made-up character, as is the PPP, who's the publicity person. So all of them are just made-up characters. Again, making um, again just playing around with this whole thing of eh, especially I think it's more relevant now than when I wrote it, which is that everything is so much about image and publicity these days. So it's a bit of playing around with that as well, with the fact that it's not enough to be a messiah even, if you don't have good publicity. It's all about uh, getting good publicity and getting good PR. So to
So,
that, so to answer to Samita's question, so there's a lot of that kind of not really deliberate social commentary, where it comes in because of the things are as they are, and I'm making fun of that. But I never set out to do that. If that's the question. Yeah.
right.
You
You
asked me,
said,
yeah, earlier. Sorry.
yeah. You mentioned that you wrote this book before you came into publishing. Did I hear you right?
Yes, actually, I wrote this book a very long time ago. I wrote this when I was.
One of your first books then in terms of writing?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Really?
It was, yeah, it was written a long time ago. It just didn't seem the right time, as the Messiah says. Also, come to think of it, it just occurred to me. It didn't seem the right time to publish it until now. So,
Oh,
you know,
really?
it's
That's
been slightly
interesting.
upgrade. Yeah, it's been slightly, added a few things here and there, but not much at all. Not the main thing. The main narrative, if you will, has remained the same.
Even the doodles were done before.
The doodles have done some extra doodles. Originally, like the feet were there and the hairdo was there, but some of the doodles have added a few more doodles and things like that.
Okay, okay.
So when I was editing it, suddenly I got into the mood to draw a little more, so I did that.
Which
But
means
yes,
quite
it
a
was a
few.
very long time ago. It was one of
Right.
my first books.
Oh, so quite a few years ago you wrote it.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I keep saying when I wrote it, because
Yeah.
and so little has changed in the years since I wrote it,
Right.
which
It's relevant.
actually really disturbed me a bit, in terms of how little the world has changed since then.
Speaking of that, Samhita had a question about the audience. Whom did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what target audience did you have in mind when you were writing the book?
I actually did not think of an audience while writing it. And actually, even when I'm writing, even for kids and all that, if an idea strikes me and I write it, I'm not thinking right then about who it is for. After it's written, you know depending on uh, what the output is, one decides. Sometimes, of course, sometimes if it's a commission thing and somebody's told me write a book for this age, then I do. But quite often I don't think of the audience when I'm writing. I just write something that I enjoy writing. Fortunately, I have the brain of an 8-year-old, so a lot of my books work for 8-year-olds. But I have the sense of humor of an 8-year-old, I think. So that's why a lot of my books work for that age. But this book definitely I just wrote for myself, and I wrote it long enough ago that that young people enjoy it now. So,
Definitely reached a great wider audience, I think.
so
Someone my age.
we did struggle with the age thing of this book, because we've said young adult, but there really is no age for a book like this. You can be you can be much younger and enjoy it. You can be much older and enjoy it. But unfortunately, the publishing industry requires these, to kind of age band the book. So we therefore we said young adults seemed the most sensible slot to put it into. It's actually meant for all ages.
Yeah. And can I make a small request for you to read?
Yeah.
For you to read this second paragraph from page 90. I think it's a very well written prose in this book
Age 90. Which was that? Interesting.
that we've read. Yeah.
That's almost a BM. Okay.
No, about the
Second
truth.
paragraph. After this, after the verse, after the.
After the Messiah replied about the truth on 90.
Truth can be anything you want it to be. That.
Truth is like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It seemed very nice.
It's like that, like a strange spinning loop. This is a continuation of the Gödel-Pugh poem. I mean, it starts with the Gödel's theorem,
Yeah.
at the end of which the critic says, "Why so mathematical?"
Yeah.
Because he was providing the vocabulary. And then she goes on to write, "Truth is like that, like a straight spinning loop that has no beginning nor end, like a foot in the mouth, like a toenail and spout, like an unbelievable godsend." Bard, said the factual critic. You're getting rather paradoxical, you know. Truth cannot be unbelievable, can it, Messiah? Truth can be anything you want it to be, the Messiah replied. So again, it was meant to be a purely nonsensical sentence, but suddenly in today's world, this makes complete sense, right? Because truth is anything that people want it to be these days. Yeah. So that's really sad for me because I meant it as nonsense. Ah, said the critic. And then the bard continues, like a swallowing tail of a cycling snake, it can neither begin nor can stop. It buzzes and fizzes and dances and jerks like a disco crazy teeny bop. The critic, forgetting his good intentions, began to criticize. Cycling is spelled cycling, he said. It's to get the meter right, the bard replied. The last line is revoltingly trite and it's not bop, it's bopper. It's to get the rhyme right, the bard replied, and began to write the next stanza. Jeeves, Jeeves, Jeeves and galore, like a system that cannot be proved, like a mountain in mist all bluish and green, like a rut that is painfully grooved. Truth can be made, can be carved and ship-shaped, can be blasted all out of belief. And when it is burst like a blown-up balloon, you can dance a small jig of relief. That is terrible, the critic pronounced. It's all right, the Messiah said. We have to take the terrible with the infeasible. The critic blinked but did not protest because a Messiah is always right. So, is that, did you want me to read some more?
No, that was
Or
good.
is that what you
I
want to
enjoyed
hear?
it. But it makes a lot of sense, even if you meant it as nonsense, which is why
Yeah,
I was
I
very
know.
drawn to it.
Except, of course, when you reach the Jeeves and Galore part, which is
Yeah.
like the nonsense. But yeah, that's what I said. So it's sometimes you write something that you think doesn't make sense, and then history and time proves it to be completely meaningful. So,
Yes, and that is the nature of narratives, right? That they can, people make connections as
correct.
it means for their
Yeah.
world, relevance for their world. So even if you repeatedly tell us that there isn't an ideology, it's going to resonate with someone in some way. It can trigger memories, it can trigger beliefs, it can trigger metaphors, analogies that resonate with them, and they will read into
And
it.
yeah, and this is something I say even with respect to children's books, little children's books, which are supposedly totally apolitical and without agenda. The thing is that whatever one writes as a writer, whatever your own beliefs are, whatever your own worldview is, that will inform the book that you're writing. Right? To that extent, yes, all of that is there in this. The fact of, the whole thing, like you pointed out about religion and the whole thing about maths or whatever my worldview and my interests and my concerns at any given time are bound to enter my book, whether I intend that or not.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so against writing books for children which have a moral of the story, because it's not necessary. Because whatever in any case, the ethics and the beliefs of the author will inform the story, and the children will absorb that. And that the way when children absorb that sort of thing, it is much deeper than if you give if you state the moral or the intention of the story.
Right,
So,
right.
sorry, I'm digressing a bit. It just occurred to me that that's also the reason that there are these issues in the book are because the book is informed by my worldview.
As you rightly said, there is no preaching of any sorts, but there is a possibility that there will be some unraveling and some reflections. It can trigger or catalyze some reflections for themselves.
Sure. That any reading does that. No, that's why we're all such great. We're all so much for children reading, because no matter what they read, it doesn't matter if they're reading comic books or whether they're reading fiction or anything. Reading triggers a lot of thinking. Whether even when you're reading something that's fun and not meant to be teaching anything, you still learn a lot. So there's no need to kind of try and push in messages into your books. Is what I
Right.
feel. Yeah.
And it's very helpful to hear that from you, particularly in times when everyone's focused on the purpose behind everything. right? So what's the
Yeah.
purpose? Why is this being
Correct,
done? Why is this story being
correct.
read? So why can't it just be read for the playfulness, for the joy of it,
The
for
joy of
reading
reading,
itself?
the joy of words. So
Right.
I must tell you this. I repeat this anecdote many times because it stayed with me so much that when once I was traveling in a train, and you know how you get talking with your co-travelers. So there was this young man, young boy, almost just out of college and started working kind of thing. And he was, so we were talking about what we do and all that. And I said, I write books for children. And I was carrying some, so I showed him some books. And they were all nonsense completely. They were nonsense picture books. And he said, so he just couldn't get his head around it. He said, but why? Why do you write these books? So I said, I write it just for the joy of reading them. He said, but what? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you write these books? What does anybody get out of reading these books? I said, that's the whole point. You're not to get anything out of it. You're supposed to just enjoy it. And this went on for a while, and finally he said, now I get it. So children will read these books, and they'll learn to enjoy reading, and then they can read real books. So I was so amused by that. That has always stayed with me. So this is the general idea that people carry about books. That books have to be a real book. It has to teach something. So if a book doesn't teach anything, then why bother reading it? And it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot. I'm talking about something that happened many years ago again, but now I find there's a huge change. People are, their parents are really encouraging children to read just for fun. They're kind of trying to pass on the joy of reading, especially parents who read like to pass on that joy to their children. That's the whole point of it.
Right, right. Yeah, so true that now it's beginning to happen a lot more. And there are those who will have, this perspective which you shared. In fact, I'm reminded of a storytelling that I had in Bhubaneswar. It was by the government, it was really nice. It was a public park, 500, 600 people. So after every session of any of the storytellers, there would be an FAQ. So the audience could ask you questions. And I had told this complete silly nonsense story. So one person asked me in Hindi ki, Madam, आपका मकसद क्या है? What is the aim? What is the message of your story? So I said, sir, whatever it is for you, whatever it is for another person, that's whatever it meant. So he wasn't satisfied. He said, नहीं, मेरा मतलब है कि आप स्टेज पे आने से पहले क्या aim लेके आती हैं? Like, what's your aim before you come? And I said, I think my aim is that we all put aside our mobiles, all our gadgets, and just share love and stories with each other, laugh together. If I have to think of a name, that's the best I can think of. But basically, I tell because it gives me joy, and I hope it gives you joy. So, yeah, we have those who are still trying to understand this space. But
The moment you
thankfully,
see a child, the moment you see a child, you want to stuff its head with things, with information and with kind of improve or inform the child in some way. That's really sad. I mean, let them have fun.
Incidentally, I must mention that Samhita's introduction to your work is this book. It's the first
Oh,
book she's read.
For the first time. And it's nice to know that it's the first book that you wrote.
yeah.
And I think it'll be the beginning of my journey into your literature.
Yeah, the others are a little young for you, Samita. I mostly write books for really small children. But yeah, but I also believe that you can enjoy books. Anybody can enjoy a children's book at any age. So happy reading to you. So, are we out of time?
I'm just checking when 5-10 minutes we can wind up apparently. So
Okay.
maybe we should just give the mic to you now, and anything about the book or anything about reading or literature that you want us to know, you want to share.
Well, having read Og, you should understand that I don't want anybody to know anything. No, honestly. So, I mean, there are many serious things in the world to talk about, but I don't think this is the place for them. I'll talk a little bit about those who want to write, maybe what I feel is important for a writer, if that helps at all. Uh, Mainly, of course, read a lot. I think that's very important, that you have to read all kinds of books, because there is a notion, especially for writing for children, there's a notion that you don't need to know much. But that's not true. You have to have a very, I think you have to know a lot of things about the world when you're writing for children, because precisely because they know so little. So what you give to them in the books is going to be the little window to the world that they have. So it's very important that as a children's writer you're aware of what's going on, and of course that is sometimes carried to an extreme these days, because we live in a world of such political correctness that any hint of humor is taken as making fun of, which it isn't always. It's sometimes you're kind of laughing affectionately at something. But that apart, I think that as a children's writer, you need to be really aware of what's happening all around the world. I also think that as any writer, one of the most important things that you need, or even as a human being actually, the most important quality you need is of empathy, of being able to put yourself in the shoes of others. And I think because that is missing, it causes most of the strife that we see in the world today. If you were able to put yourself in the shoes of another person and see what they're going through, I think the world would be a much happier place. It's because you don't see the other person, as you don't understand where the other person is coming from. There are a lot of problems, and that is from a human point of view. But from a writer's point of view, it's very important, because when you're writing a book, you have many characters in the book, and you have to be able to see, like, you have to be able to see everything from every character's point of view. You have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of all these characters, because if you don't do that, then you end up creating stereotypical characters. You end up creating black and white characters who are not multidimensional, and um, who are not nuanced, because you're kind of not seeing things from their point of view. So empathy, I think, is a very important quality for any writer to have. When you're writing, if you can't put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're writing about, then it'll never ring true. And it's especially true of writing for children, because for you already, the narrator or the protagonist is not you. Whereas if you're writing as an adult, you could it's very easy to put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist. But when you're writing for children, you have to put yourself in the shoes of an 8-year-old, and that requires a particular kind of brain exercise, which is not everybody's cup of tea, which is why not everybody can write for children. So empathy and knowing everything that you need to know, reading a lot, and ultimately the one thing that I don't I preach but don't practice, which is that you must keep writing. You must write every day, because it's like any other muscle, it needs to be exercised. This is what my disciplined friends tell me, and I don't actually follow it, but I can see they're right, because when I go through long periods of not writing, I find it so hard to come back to writing, because you really need to keep on writing. And so the exercise that a lot of my writer friends do, and are now pushing me to do, and I have been trying to do, is that you write a little every day, even if it doesn't make sense. Just write, because it, uh, it's just the act of writing frees up it frees up your mind. It makes it, as you write more, it becomes easier to write. So these are the few tips I have for writers. And the other thing I would like to say is about reading. For parents, I would like to say this, which is that please never be a gatekeeper to your child's reading. Let them read what they want. We tend to decide that don't read comics, don't read a lot of parents don't like the children reading storybooks, because they think it's a waste of time. I really think parents should let children read what they want, because I mean, forget the academic um, advantages of being a good reader. Forget that. Just that you want your children to be happy, right? As a parent, I think that must be your basic aim in life. Should be that your children should be happy. So the reason you push them towards what we call success or anything is because you think that is the route to happiness. But so the assumption is that every parent wants their child to be happy, and reading gives the kind of happiness that nothing else can give. If you are a reader, then you are happy in so many circumstances that would otherwise be very difficult. So I request parents to let their children read what they want, let them find what interests them. A lot of children who end up not liking reading, I find when I talk to children, I find that it's because they're being forced to read the kind of book. So they think that reading means they have to read a certain kind of book, and that they don't like that, so they stop reading altogether. So if you want your child to read and to become a reader and be happy in reading, then you must let them read what they want. This is my request to parents.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so much for that, Anushka. It was really nice having this engaging discussion with you and knowing a little bit more about Ogged, to start with, knowing that the title is Ogged. Yes. And yeah, Samhita too, it was lovely getting her perspective as a young
Yeah, thank
leader.
you.
Yeah. Thank you very much on
Thank
behalf
you
of
both.
Value
That was
Words.
so much
And
fun.
thank you,
I really
audience.
enjoyed.
Yeah, lovely.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Good
Thank you
luck
so
with the
much.
book. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.